First of all, I'm very glad to be able to visit your country once again. It's the last time I shall live in Turkey or any other country. It's the last trip of my life from an intellectual point of view. And I thought it should be Turkey. There are many other places where I could have gone. And I hope that my few days of presence here will help those Turks who want to remember the great tradition of many centuries to remember it again and to resonate with the truth that has always been the part of our tradition, whether we are Turks, Iranians, Persians, or Arabs, or anything else throughout the Islamic world and Islamic civilization. The title of my talk today was not chosen by me. It was chosen by my hosts here in Turkey, and a very challenging title, Remaining Authentically Human. It's a very challenging title, and what I'm going to say is going to rub some people the wrong way, but one should either remain silent, or if one speaks, one should speak the truth, never anything else. And this is how I understand this very important issue. First of all, to be human. The word human, I'm now speaking in English, and in European languages, like French, humain, humana, and other words that draw from Latin languages, has the word man in it plus hue. And man, of course, does not mean male, but it means the whole of the human collectivity, including both male and female. So whatever I have to say about human today and man does not mean man in the English sense, but al-insan, or insan, which you also have in Turkish, the word insan, which incorporates and includes both the male and the female. Let me start by saying that according to all authentic Islamic teachings, and going back to the Quran, and in all other religions of the world, before the rise of modernism in the West and the coming of 19th century evolutionism, the belief was that man was not evolved. We were created by God as man, as men and women, not as apes and monkeys who gradually jumped from tree to tree and ended up being Christ and the Prophet and great scholars and great physicists over the time periods, which magically transformed the monkey into the great luminaries of human history. We believe that, I certainly believe, that man has not evolved, and I believe that Darwinian evolution, which has had a lot of influence in your country, as in mine since the 19th century, but especially in Turkey and Islamic countries, is really one of the biggest fibs and lies which has been imposed upon human history. I do not believe that we have evolved. The Quran always says so. And there's a wonderful saying that is very telling. Once a man came to Seyyed Ali ibn Abi Talib, and asked him, Ya Ali, who was there before man? He said, man. And who was there before that man? He said, man. And if you ask me until the end of the world, I shall say man. As long as there has been reality, there has been man. And that man has always been man, that is men and women, over the ages, with all the changes, all the transformations that have come about, but nevertheless, the reality of man remains man. We are all the children of Adam, and when according to the Quran, God asked not of Adam, but of all of human beings, Alastu barabbikum, am I not your Lord? It doesn't say Alastu barabbika, it's in plural in Arabic, Alastu barabbikum. We all answered Bala, yes. We live in that, yes. Yea. We affirm God's lordship. And that has not changed over time. So, to be human is to remember that we have always been human. We have not ascended from the monkeys. We have descended from the angels. We have descended from the reality in which God has created us. The poet whom we share together, and we both love, Jalaluddin Rumi, said, پیش از آن کاندر جهان جام و می و انگور بود، از شراب لایزالی جان ما مخمور بود. ما ز ایام الست کوس اناالحق می زدیم، پیش از این که این گیرودار و فتنه منصور بود. That is, before there was the wine and grape, our soul was already drunk with the divine wine. From eternity, we played the drum of Ana al-Haq, I am the truth. Long before all the commotion of the world and the tragedy of Mansur al-Hallaj, who said Ana al-Haq. We were born in eternity, in a sense. And to speak about being authentically human is to remember where we come from and where we go. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. We don't have to say that only when Muslims die. Verily we come from God, and to Him is our return. That is a reality with which we should always live. We come from God and we return to God. Whether we like it or not. Whether we like it or not, this is our destiny. And so let us try to take advantage of it. Now, God, from the traditional point of view, which is mine, that is to be authentically human, must realize, has created this whole creation as reflections of His names and qualities, of theophanies. The root of all things, بَيَدِهِ مَلَكُوتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ, and the Quran says the root of all things is with God. But God has manifested His reality, His beauty, His names and qualities throughout all of creation. Each creature, a beautiful bird, a swan, a fox, a tree, reflect an aspect really of God's qualities. But only man, men and women, only the human being has God given the gift of all of His qualities. We are the only creatures who reflect all of the divine qualities. Also, why sometimes we should reflect the names of His mercy, but sometimes we also reflect the names of His wrath, and wrongly so. We should get to this later. But essentially, when the Quran says, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, verily I placed upon the earth a Khalifa, a vicegerent. It meant that we are God's vicegerent. We are God's representatives on earth. Whatever we are, whether we are a president or a housewife or a child or a maid or a Nobel Prize physicist, whatever we are, from the Islamic point of view, must remember that we are Khalifatullah, we are God's Khalifa. But we can fulfill that only on the condition that we realize also we are Abdullah. Abdullah is not only the name of a prophet and his father, but the name of all of us. That is, we have to be both Khalifa and Abd. That is, we have to be the representative of God on earth and also His servant, His obedient slave. We don't use the word slave with a negative character, but Abd in Arabic can also mean a slave. Anyway, the important thing is that we have those two realities within ourselves, but we also have the freedom. We have the freedom of negating it. We have both determinism and freedom. I shall come to that in a moment. But we can say that throughout history, throughout all our religious Islamic history. But before that also of the other Abrahamic religions and other great religions of the world, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, whatever it be, this was always realized. Modern man is the first man in history who claims to be Khalifatullah without being Abdullah. That is, wants to play the role of God on earth. That part of being the Khalifa, but rejecting the being for whom he is the Khalifa and not being the Abd. And the fact that we're destroying the world, that these modern Western civilizations that we try to emulate from morning to night killed 100 million people during the Second World War. 100 million people. And now the whole life of the earth is in danger because of what we do. Is because we want to play the role of God, being his Khalifa, his vicegerent, but without obeying him, without being his Abd, without being Abdullah. And this brings me up to a very important point, which has been discussed by Islamic thinkers over the ages, the question of determinism and freedom. Jabr wa Tafwiz and Ikhtiyar, and those of you who've studied Islamic philosophy and theology, I don't want to get into technical terms here, know all about it. There are many great writers have on the side of Jabr and others on Ikhtiyar. But in our everyday experience, even if we are Jabri, we say God determines everything, we also feel we have freedom. I have the freedom right now to put my hand on this watch or not put it here. I feel that immediately, and that cannot be denied. At the same time, we as Muslims believe that God determines everything and his will is absolute, and that's why we keep using such terms as inshallah, inshallah in all Islamic languages from morning to night. May the will of God be done. But when you say in, that means we human beings are also able not to do the will of God. And not to do the will of God means to have freedom. The grandeur of the human state, the fact that we're supposed to be the jewel of crown of creation, at the same time we destroy more animals and plants than all of the creatures of the world put together. None of them can match us in our destructive power, in how we kill, we maim, we decimate animals, plants, creatures of the world, other creatures than us. All of this is due to the fact that we have freedom to do so. And we even have the freedom to deny God himself. Now, we live at such a moment in history. If I were addressing an audience in Istanbul during the time of Sultan Suleiman, that possibility was not there. But now that you teach all these atheistic philosophies in all your universities, like we do in Tehran and Iran, I don't think I'm criticizing Turkey alone. We Muslims everywhere. And just are already servants to Western thought, much of which is atheistic, is against the divine principle, and believes in human freedom independent of God, is something that we have to realize. God has even given us the power to deny him. It is God who has given us this freedom. If God had not made us free, we would not have been able to deny him. It's a deep metaphysical point that our Sufis have brought out. It's a very delicate point. In a general lecture, I cannot deal with it too much. But the fact that we deny God itself is the proof of the existence of God, if you really knew it. That's why the great German mystic Meister Eckhart said, the more you blaspheme, the more you praise God. In a sense, to be able to blaspheme is to have freedom. And freedom ultimately belongs to God alone. And the fact that we are free to deny God is a proof, metaphysically, of God's reality. Now, these sentences are very heavy sentences, metaphysically not easy to understand, perhaps with a large audience like this, but I'm obliged, I'm forced to talk about it. Anyway, the grandeur of the human state. The grandeur of the human state. Whether it was from the time of Adam or when the Turkic people in Central Asia, or the Seljuk period, or the Ottoman period, or the Pahlavi period, or the Khomeini period, or the Turkish Republic period, no matter where we are in Islamic history, the grandeur of the human state is that it is able to ascend all of the levels of reality. It's not limited to one single level of reality like all other creatures are. We can be saints, we can be sinners. We can be the best of creatures, we can be the worst of creatures. We can be the best in everything, we can be the worst. The good that we can do is incomparable. The evil we can do is also incomparable. No reptile in Africa, the most poisonous rattlesnake in Arizona, has a poison as strong as our kind can have, of killing the souls of people. At least the rattlesnake only kills the body. We have the power even to kill the soul. So we're given actually tremendous possibilities. But we cannot take the grandeur of the human state lightly. To belittle it in the biological sense and aggrandize it by saying what human beings is ultimate reality is the great paradox of the modern world. On the one hand, there's tremendous humility. Oh, we are just one creature on a third-rate planet on a 10th-rate sun revolving around the space with so on and so on. One could be fooled by these pseudo-astronomical examples. The truth does not change with that. On the one hand, we have all of that grandeur. On the other hand, we have all the evil that we can perform. And no civilization in history has shown that as well as modern civilization. That we, I'm talking as a Persian, or Turks and other Muslims are trying to copy morning and night, emulating as if we do emulating the son of the prophet. It's the modern West that has in fact shown us that as the grandeur of human state decreases, as the West creates fewer and fewer saints, many of you are educated people. If I ask you the name of a Western saint, you say, oh, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Dominic, and this, they're all in the Middle Ages. Can you name me 18th, 19th century saint? There are some, but they're extremely few. Probably nobody in this room, maybe one or two, has even heard of one. The loss of sanctity, the loss of the grandeur of man has been compensated for by the grandeur of power in this world. And in fact, the replacement of the worldview from a theocentric, that is divinely centered worldview, to a homocentric, man-made centered worldview. Today, the center of access of consciousness of human beings is no longer God, it's man. God is at the periphery, man is at the center. And this is the gift which the Renaissance humanism bestowed upon the rest of the world. Now, one of the most important points that this whole trend created was to destroy the tripartite structure of the human state, which Islamic philosophy, as well as classical Greek philosophy and Hindu philosophy, all the classical philosophy believe in. In our own terminology, we always had the three levels of jism, nafs, and ruh. The body, the soul, and the spirit. What the West did, first of all, is to collapse the ruh into the nafs. Descartes already, in his dualism, started that. The Cartesian dualism, which is the origin of Western philosophy, began with that great error. That and now we all talk in English about body and soul. But actually, there are three parts within us. The ruh is not the nafs. The ruh is an immortal, eternal reality within us, which is the source of goodness, of beauty, of life itself. It is that which makes possible the functioning of the nafs. And a human life, from a religious point of view, is to try to bring about a wedding between the nafs and the ruh. But the consequences also for the body, because our body is affected. Our body is a part of our reality. That's why we all believe as Muslims and as Christians in the resurrection of the body, not only the spirit in the afterlife. Now, in order to accept this, in order to understand this, one has to really have the courage to criticize this current evolutionism that has run amok everywhere. It began in biology with the Beagle trip of Charles Darwin to South America. Now everything is evolving. Everything is supposed to be evolving. We've lost the sense of permanence. We've lost the sense of permanence. Everything is changing. Our schools are based on studying and teaching change. I was educated in two of America's best universities, at MIT and Harvard. When I studied physics, that was the one and mathematics were the only disciplines in which certain permanent truth was taught. Everything else was taught relatively. This is what 18th century philosophers said about this. This is what 13th century thinkers said about this, and so forth and so on. There was no truth as such. Ma al-haqiqa. What is the truth? That's irrelevant. It's now gotten much worse since I became educated. Now the word truth is a dirty word you don't use anymore in polite society, as Ananda Kumar once said. I graduated from Harvard University, whose motto is veritas. Veritas in Latin means truth, from which comes the French vérité, and veridical in English. And around the Harvard University campus, the signs veritas, veritas, veritas. Once you get inside the campus, there's no veritas whatsoever. The veritas are limited to the few signs on the walls around Harvard. It's finished. This is my own university, the best university in America. And the same everywhere else. And we're unfortunately falling trapped to this in countries like ours in the Islamic world, which keep emulating the West. There is such a thing as the truth. The truth is always abiding. It's very interesting that the testimony of Tawheed, of unity in Islam, which we all believe in as Muslims, La ilaha illallah, there has no time in it, has no geography in it, has no material condition to it. It's an absolute statement about the absolute. It is always there, has always been there. There was no time when La ilaha illallah was not La ilaha illallah. Whereas if you say Christ is the Son of God, as the Orthodox Christians believe, there was a time when God didn't have his Son. Christ wasn't born. So it's not eternal. Unless you say it was a heavenly Son, and that's something else. But that's Christ who was born in Palestine and was crucified in Jerusalem. Anyway, I had to take this occasion talking to a brotherly and sisterly Turkish audience about this question of reducing everything to its reflection in time by evolutionism. It's a very catastrophic way of looking at things. It isn't that Muslims were not aware that things changed. Not at all. When the Seljuks, who were Turks, first came to my country, Iran, from the center of Asia, they developed remarkable art with Persian artists, and they were patrons of it. Seljuk art is one of the great classics of Islamic art. Then those same Seljuks pushed and came into Anatolia, the Seljuk of the Ottoman Empire, and they produced another very major school of art. They don't look identical. It isn't that it was just monotonous and nothing occurring. There was tremendous creativity going on. Sultan Ahmed Mosque doesn't look like the great Seljuk mosques in Iran, Syria, and Iraq. Not at all. But the same principles. The principle is always abiding. The reality is always abiding. I always tell my students that if you take a Norwegian or Swede and close his eyes and put him in the bazaar of Rabat in Morocco, open up his eyes and he looks around and then close his eyes again and bring him to the bazaar of Isfahan and open his eyes again. The architecture is not the same, but the atmosphere is the same. He'll feel in the same civilization. Islam created this civilization based on permanence, but permitting also transformation on the basis of that permanence. Like a tree, a cherry tree, gives a new branch next spring, but still a cherry tree. The cherry tree-ness of the cherry tree doesn't change. At the same time, it's alive. And to be alive is to function in time. This is something which is very, very important to remember. Let me now turn to the last part of my talk. My time is getting over. And I want to say something that was difficult to discuss in a short period of time, but I have to say it. How do we remain human? Yes, we're all accidentally human. 2 ears, 2 eyes, a brain. We buy human dress and wear it and so forth. But to be religiously, philosophically, intellectually human, that's a very important question. How do we remain human? To try to be only human is to fall into subhuman. The world has shown us how to be human. I believe that there's need for 2 realities in order to be human. One is revelation, one is tradition. That is, there has to be a message from heaven which determines actually the contours of the reality of which a particular humanity lives. And until the modern world, there was no exception to this. The Quran already said, وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا. To every people we have sent a messenger. We Muslims cannot negate that the Polynesians did not have a religion because we believe in 124,000 prophets. And the Quran said we sent لِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ to every people. So he must have sent a prophet to the Polynesians as well. We have a universalist perspective of revelation in Islam, which is really quite remarkable. I believe that no human civilization can survive without revelation. What it will do is first reject revelation, and then create pseudo-revelation, and then die out. And I believe we are in this state now of Western civilization. People who are really at the forefront of Western civilization already talk about that. Talk of death of Western civilization, looking for a new paradigm of life, is now not an unknown thing. When I was at Harvard, nobody talked about such things 50 years ago. But now, intelligent people even in the West are becoming aware of it. Second is tradition. By tradition, I do not mean habit. I mean sacred teachings which are revealed actually and which are preserved and applied from generation to generation, principles which remain permanent but whose applications can change from time to time as the tradition adopts itself to different circumstances and different situations. We live today in an anti-traditional world. Besides economics and making money, there are no ultimate principles that people live by. To some extent, that's not true in Islamic world. Alhamdulillah, there's still people who live by Islamic principles here. But certainly in the West, and Western part of the world, and wherever modernism has gone, even in the East, where people have become out-and-out modernists, this holds true for them. Whereas tradition requires actually clinging to certain principles, no matter what, and not allowing the world around us to make us, but for us to make the world. Once I always want to be honest in quoting things. Once I was discussing this issue with the great French Orientalist Henri Corbin, and he said something wonderful. Probably some of you know French, so I quote it in French really quickly, but I'll translate this. Il said, l'homme ordinaire est fait par le temps. L'homme spirituel est celui qui fait le temps. That is, ordinary people are made by the times. The spiritual person is the person who makes the times. In order for us to survive spiritually, we have to make our times, not simply be a slave of it, passive towards it, or whatever comes, everybody's doing, so let's do it also. That cannot be a lasting solution for us. I believe very deeply, as Islam has always taught, since we reflect the divine names and qualities, خلق الله آدم على نفسه. God has created us, and He has given us a soul. We reflect divine qualities. What is good in us, everything that's good in us, even the beauty of our face, or detection of goodness, or truth, or anything, or justice, anything that's good in us is really a reflection of divine qualities within us. And therefore, I've written somewhere, I repeat this phrase, which many people have not quoted. I said, not to reflect the divine is to fall below the human. Humanism is not a possibility in the secular humanism. I don't mean Islamic humanism or Christian humanism. Secular humanism is not a possibility. Because once you deny the divine, the soul loses its anchor and it falls below what is really human. But in order to benefit from tradition, we must remember that we need religion in order to be authentic. All these modernistic movements, Salafi movements, Wahhabi movements, I have no intention of visiting Mecca anymore. I made the Hajj already, so if I don't get a visa next time, it's all right. These sort of skewed interpretation of Islam, when we put it politely, it's much more than that. It's really distortion of traditional teachings of Islam. They're not going to get us anywhere. What we need is authentically Islamic teachings, religious teachings, and that which could make us authentically human. Regular humanism or secularism is no solution whatsoever for the humanization of man, but finally we lead to the dehumanization of man. Humanity has never been as dehumanized as today. Not only the workers who are like a cog in a machine in a factory, but even socially, in the most advanced countries, man is reduced, in a sense, to a machine, to a part of the machine that works. There's no virtue in work. There's no spiritual quality in work. There's no art associated with it, except the few people who design a new Cadillac. Those are the artists. But all those who make it are really simply cogs in the wheel. They're like bolts and nuts and levers in a factory, subhanAllah. But that's unfortunately the truth. So, in fact, the dehumanization of man results from the secularization of humanism, secularistic humanism, which now endangers us all. And finally, there's a third element that is not usually discussed when one talks about being human, and that is the world of nature. Modern man thought that the grandeur of man was to dominate over nature. Francis Bacon, the famous English authority, who's considered in many ways to be the father of modernism in England, believed that the goal of science is power. I'm quoting from Bacon. The goal of science is power. We never had such a thing in Islam. The goal of ilm in Islam was always tawheed, was always a spiritual perfection. Ilm is one of the qualities of God, which is lent to us. Can you imagine? You can't say in English, God is a scientist. But you can say in Arabic, God is al-alim. If you translate ilm as science, So you have to be very, very careful here not to fall into this terrible, terrible intellectual trap. We have had always throughout history a view that you could call theomorphic. Of course, Europeans cut many of the trees of Europe, of France, in the year 1100. That's why there are fewer trees in France than there are in Scandinavia. The Scandinavians didn't do it. You come right out of Stockholm and you get into a beautiful forest. You come all out of Paris, you have to drive 200 kilometers to get to a forest. All of that is true. But nevertheless, there was always a control over mass destruction of nature. It was never complete. It was never a kind of devouring, a kind of rape of nature. Written somewhere where I wrote my Man on Nature, the lecture I gave in Chicago in 1966, which started the environmental movement, in fact, in many ways, that traditional man dealt with nature like his wife, from which he drew pleasure, but to whom he was also responsible. Whereas modern man treats nature as a prostitute. That's it. There's no care for this other being. What happens to it? What happens in the future? And so we have today the transformation of theomorphism into anthropomorphism. That is man-centeredness rather than God-centeredness. And that has been devastating, absolutely devastating for the understanding of nature. Things are changing. Alhamdulillah, things are changing. And I remember that when I gave the Rockefeller Series lecture in Chicago, which predicted the environmental crisis which came as man and nature, and astaghfirullah, I don't want to speak of myself, but it's a good thing at least the Muslim did something first before the European important issues of the day. That book was my first book to come out in Turkish. The Turkish intelligentsia realized its importance, and long before I had any contact, Turkish intelligentsia in the 80s had already come out. Anyway, in that book, I mentioned the fact that it's impossible to remove a theocentric point of view and a pure anthropomorphism without destroying nature as well. That is, the treatment of nature is a very, very important element in the discussion of what it means to be authentically human today. To be authentically human today means also to be a protector of nature, of the natural world, of God's creation, not to waste, not to be indifferent, not to think that we are the last generation, that nobody else is going to come, I don't give a darn. Whereas at least we should think about where our grandchildren will live. They were living right now. Where is the oxygen for our grandchildren? What's going to happen? When it comes to that, everybody becomes non-scientific. Oh, somehow man will solve it. No, but according to modern science, these are very, very dangerous trends that we see right before us continuing onwards. Anyway, let me conclude. My time is up. To come back to the word for human. As I said already at the beginning of my lecture, the word for human is insan. The Sufis say that the word insan originally came from uns, which you also have in Turkish, familiarity, closeness. You have monosol, oshar, manus, uns. But once man fell and committed sin, it changed and became derived from nasyan, to forget. Insan became forgetful by virtue of the hubut, of the fall. Our duty is, inshallah, to remember to be insan who has uns with God, with the only reality that is worth to our uns ultimately. And everything else in this world we have uns with. Our family, our wives, our children, our work, art, whatever, are really reflections of that uns with Allah Ta'ala. I want to conclude and thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I'm willing to take 3 questions that Gledge, my old friend, is sitting here, and he will field them, but no more than 3. Assalamu alaikum.
Now we will have 3 questions. You can have a sit out there. I will assist you. Geldi mi?
There are some questions. I will read you in English because all questions arrived us in English, actually. I'm surprised. So I will read it in English, then I will translate it into Turkish. All right, okay. Arkadaşlar, sorular hepsi İngilizce gelmiş. Dolayısıyla İngilizce olarak kendisine soracağım. O kendisi cevap verirken de sadece soruları Türkçe'ye çevireceğim ama kendi çevirisini zaten kulaklıktan simultan olarak çevriliyor. The first question is, we stopped reading and feeling poetry. In the current of modern life, we are dragged by never-ending notifications. We pray, but we do so for protection and interest. What should we do in our quotidian lives to remind ourselves to the perennial presence of Allah? This was the question, and let me translate it into Turkish.
One by one, let me answer.
Yes.
Give that to
No, I will translate question into English.
Yes, all right.
Only, not your answer.
My answer is, I thought maybe people there would also like to hear the answer in English. Anyway.
Let me translate this into Turkish. The question.
The question was in Turkish.
No, question is English.
Oh, English?
Yes.
I wasn't listening. So all right. All right. Yes. I thought you were translating it for me in English. I see.
Aslında bilmiyorum, simultane tercümede çevirdi mi mütercim arkadaş soruları Türkçe'ye? Ya çevrildiyse o zaman gerek yok. Please go ahead. Go ahead. You can translate. All right. No need.
Let me see the first question. Whoever posed this question, Salim, is a very good question. First of all, the second part I will answer, what should we do in our quotidian lives to remind ourselves the perennial presence of Allah? I suppose you're a Muslim because you write like this. The first thing to do is to say your salat, to say your namaz, to say your prayers. And then to try to remember God the rest of the day as much as you can. And Islam has a wonderful job of impregnating various Islamic languages, not only Arabic, but Persian, Turkish, Urdu, Swahili, whatever it is, with words which always remind you of God. Inshallah, mashallah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah. But do it with awareness, because we do it automatically without thinking. But do it in such a way that you realize that God is always with you, that you're always in contact with God, that whatever you want in life, ultimately it's He who will answer. And human beings do not have His power. The first part of the question, we start reading and feeling poetry. That's very sad, because Turkey was a country in which not only there were great Turkish poets, but in which the greatest mystical poet of the world, who wrote in Persian, Jalaluddin Rumi, lived in Konya and died. His mausoleum is the spiritual center of Turkey today. And Turkey, in Turkey there was always a great love of poetry. I knew Turkish ministers in the old days who survived from the pre-Atatürk period, who all knew Persian poetry. Two of your sultans have diwans of Persian poetry. And Sultan Salim's diwan, mashallah, is pretty good poetry. A Turkish ruler who had a diwan of Persian poetry, and Turkish Ottoman poetry is so rich. So there's no excuse for stop on reading poetry. Start, nobody's stopping you. I know in schools this might be a problem, but that's individuals who are interested, there's always a path. There's no excuse. In the current of modern life, you're dragged by never-ending notifications. You pray, but we do so for protection and interest. Now, this is an important issue. Yes, we have interest in praying to God, to say our namaz, our salat, because we have interest that when we die, we don't go to hell. Yes, there's interest in that. That's a spiritual interest. But more than that, we pray because God wants us to. We want to do God's will. If you go throughout the day to all kinds of things, there's only one thing you can be sure that you're doing God's will is when you say the namaz. Because the form of the namaz was given to us by the Prophet. It has not changed. There's no Darwinian evolution in it. And he received it in the Laylatul Miraj when he went to heaven and bowed before the divine throne. It's God-given right. It's a remarkable right. No religion has such a thing, because there must be some Christians in the audience. In Christianity, what corresponds to our namaz or salat is the Mass, is the Eucharist, which has to be administered by a priest. You have to have the altar, you have to have this, you have to have that. Whereas namaz, you can say anywhere. You can say anywhere. Even if you're on a ship, the ulama have given fatwas that you can say your namaz while the ship is tilting. There's nowhere in the world you cannot say it. Whether in Darul Islam, Darul Harb, Darul Sol, in Turkey, America, there's no excuse for it whatsoever. It's one of the remarkable institutions. And then everybody in the Islamic prayers is a priest. Every man and woman in this room is like a Catholic priest. Only the Catholic priest can give the Mass. But we perform what corresponds to the Mass in Islam ourselves. We are our own priests. The ulama are not priests. They are interpreters of Islamic law. They're lawyers of Islamic law. You don't have to know one alim the rest of your life if you don't want to. But if you're a good Christian, you cannot go without a priest or a minister. You cannot go to church, or there's no Mass, there's no communion. All of these things have to be done by a priest. In a sense, Islam made everyone a priest. Every man and woman in this room is a priest. I don't use the word priestess because people think of the old mythologies.
This is also in English, so doctor or physician.
Welcome to our country. Reading your works is very inspiring and hopeful for us. I'm asking for a medical approach that will be based on God. What kind of training program should be designed, for example, for a medical doctor to educate himself in the philosophy of modern science and criticism of modern science? What will be the most effective content order for this training? You have to invite me once more to Turkey to give a lecture about this. This is a very, very important issue. Medicine is a major science cultivated in Islamic civilization. The most widely read single book of medicine in all human history, in all civilizations of the world, Kitab al-Qanun fi Tib of Ibn Sina, 4th century Persian physician whose works are extremely well known in the Ottoman period, and all Ottoman medicine is really Abyssinian medicine. This medical tradition survived throughout the Islamic world and also became mixed with Ayurvedic medicine, which is Indian traditional medicine, when Islam went to India. And when the British came and colonized India, because the population was so great, they did not have enough money to establish Western medical schools. And so they preserved the old traditional medical schools and the traditional medicine. That's why to this day in Pakistan, you have hakims, traditional doctors, a university that give MDs in Islamic medicine in Pakistan and India, especially in Delhi, and Hamdard Institute, a university founded by two brothers, two Muslim brothers, who both Hakim, one who lived in India, one in Pakistan after partition, and many other institutions of this kind that you have in these two countries. In other Islamic countries, including Turkey, Iran, and the Arab world, in the 19th century, gradually Islamic medicine became folk medicine. The medical schools were dominated by Western medicine. I come from a family, my grandfather was the royal doctor. That's why I'm called Nasr. He had the royal title Nasr al-Tabba given to him by the Persian king, Muzaffar ad-Din Shah. And my father was also both a royal doctor and also regular practitioners. And my father knew traditional medicine as well as modern medicine. So with Dr. Wolf and others, first Western physicians that came to Iran. And in our household, both of them sort of existed. But there was tremendous pressure, also because financial reasons. Because doctors who went into modern medicine, they made tremendous amount of money. And they didn't want people going to traditional hakims because they would lose money. It was a financial question. With the help of our queen in Iran, I tried to revive traditional medicine. And we had the first conference ever held in the world in traditional Islamic medicine in Tehran, held in Isfahan, in which I also invited some Turkish Hakim Bashis, and also from all over the Islamic world. And now here I'm in exile, now 40 years away from my country, that they now have a medical school for traditional medicine in Iran as well. But in Syria, other places, it's still a kind of folk medicine. And you have no choice but to study Western medicine. But you have a choice, if you study Western medicine, to try also to study Islamic medicine on your own, and many forms of practice. I don't mean brain surgery, but internal medicine field like that, you can incorporate many elements of Islamic medicine. I have a wonderful doctor friend who's sitting right there, Dr. Rahimian, whom I brought as my physician from Washington. He's a wonderful doctor, studied both in Tehran and the United States. And he's I hope he's not embarrassed, no one knows who is. He's sitting next to my wife in the middle. He incorporates into his Western medical practice also Islamic medicine, Islamic drugs, and so forth, which are very, very helpful at times. We are at the moment of the revival of non-Western medicine. Chinese acupuncture has already captured in the world. It's never come to your country from the West. They did not have any acupuncturists there during Sultan Abdul Hamid's reign. And Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, Indian medicine has become very popular in the United States. Islamic medicine is behind. There are very important association of Islamic doctors in Florida, a lecture for them to start the Islamic Medical Association. They're very good doctors, and they're now trying to spread Islamic medicine, but we're behind India and China, way behind in the field of medicine as far as the West is concerned. In France, it's somewhat different because of such a large Algerian and Moroccan population and Tunisian population in France, and many of them were poor people. And Western medicine is much more expensive than Islamic medicine. And so many people try to bring Hakim Bashis from North Africa. So there's France's situation is somewhat better. But nevertheless, it's a kind of jihad that we have to perform to preserve a very, very important heritage, which also is financially very important. All of our countries are dumping grounds for third-rate drugs that the West doesn't need. They're all imported to the East. You should know that. They're dumping ground. And we should make our own medicine, we should have our own doctors, and we also economically be a major event for all of our countries. I'll take one more question.
Last two questions. You choose one of them. Efendim, son iki soruyu verdim. Kendisi bir tanesini seçsin.
I will answer Ayana Thabit. I will not talk about Israel. One question about Israel, and so the great tragedy that we all feel. And I said jokingly, there are only two Arab countries left in the world, Turkey and Iran. The other Arab countries have disappeared. They're iron drab bad. It doesn't mean anything, and that they're going to pay very dearly for it. But the question here is about the Ayana Thabita. Some lady asked about Ayana Thabita. Ayana Thabita means the eternal archetypes, the immutable archetypes. The Quran says, بَيَدِهِ مَلَكُوتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. In the hands of God are held the roots of all things. The malakut here means the spiritual root, the ontological root of all things. And that is the world of the Ayana Thabita. They're in a sense, some of use the word mind of God. That's not a good term. We don't use it in Arabic. But divine aql, and divine intellect. And God breathed through Nafas ar-Rahman upon the Ayana Thabita, and the whole world was created. So the stuff of this world is the breath of God's compassion. Nafas ar-Rahman, according to Sufism. Sufism is so rich, unbelievably, in these doctrines that we really need to pay more attention to them, investigate them more. And that's one of the very, very important doctrines. It does not negate creation at all, but it puts a new light upon the nature of creation and what the Ayana Thabit has. Everything in this world, by virtue of that exists because of the Nafas ar-Rahman, and the reality that it expresses are reflections of the Ayana Thabit. We have descended through various levels of being, into which I can't go now. Well, thank you very much. I thank you enough of your time. I hope I didn't give you a headache. I pray for all of you. May Allah Ta'ala bless you, Turkey, your government, your president, and all the wonderful scholars and friends that I have in this lovely country, which I feel like a second country of my own, now that I can't take any planes east of here. And I pray that, inshallah, that I'll continue to have close relations with all the wonderful scholars of this country, including him who I've known for 40 years. Assalamu alaikum.